Um, tonight's topic is empowerment. We did have that chapter on power and gaining influence. Uh, kind of power comes from the external, so to speak. By people kind of giving you the power, maybe because you're an expert, or a lot of the personal characteristics that you have, or a lot of the positional characteristics. So all of those things help us amass power. But when we talk about empowerment, we're talking like power coming from within. And I'll talk a little bit about that and what that means, or that concept. And when I was oh back in the I'm trying to think, maybe the 80s and 90s, empowerment was a big buzzword in business. You know how there's business fads we all have, TQM, Six Sigma. Well, empowerment was a big buzzword. Corporations were saying we're going to be an empowering organization. That in it became a cliche, but really the concepts that we're talking about are kind of, I think, at the heart of what it means to have a workforce that is productive and high performing. Um, and so I'm gonna spend some time just talking about this empowerment, and you run into the concept when we get to motivation. What it what's it mean to be motivated? Empowerment really kind of gets at that intrinsic motivation in all of us. So let me bring up some notes on it, or some slides. So let's see, Dom, I'm going to have to mute you there. There's some sounds coming. All right. And so while the chapter talks about empowerment, it also goes through a concept of engagement, um, which is kind of a more trendy word uh, to use today, but really we're talking about delegation. And I happen to think delegation, the skill of delegation, I don't know, I can't remember if any of you have picked that, but as you um, start to arise in your managerial career, especially when you're managing other people, being able to delegate is a pretty important skill. And it's one that is a little more complicated than what it might seem, and we'll talk about that. But empowerment, you know, what some of the experts would say, or your textbook, and he says that getting at in delegation, effectively delegating is one really effective way to empower a workforce. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Uh, in this chapter, we're talking about maybe three big concepts or skills related. One is, what's an empowering environment? What can you do to have an empowering environment? Uh, and then empowering yourself, and then effective delegation and engagement are just some of the skills. And if you sit back, and if I ask you this, you don't need to answer these. For many of you, how much of this is true or false where you work? What I think doesn't count very much, or most people with power take advantage of people like me, or the people in charge really don't care what happens to me, or I'm left out of things that are going on. Uh, that leads to sometimes a sense of feeling powerless in a workplace. And then, as I mentioned, we had the concepts of power versus empowerment. That the power chapter, we we talked about, the characteristics, personal characteristics, and like positional characteristics of power. And mainly these all come from the outside. If you are influencing others, there's to a certain sense, the followers or people you're influencing allow you to influence them. So power, it's more of an external source. Empowerment really comes from within. You feeling a sense of power. Power is having the capacity to have others basically do what you want, influence them. And always there's the thought, if I get more power, that means somebody else has less. That's like a win-lose or splitting the pie. And usually that leads to competition, conflict. Whereas empowerment is kind of something internal that's going on. So ultimately, everyone can have it. It's basically the capacity for you to do what you want, the capacity to have others to do what they want to do. You feeling more empowered doesn't take away from everyone else. You having a feeling of power doesn't necessarily other people have less. And ultimately, it leads to cooperation. And we get to teamwork. We'll talk about this a little more. So, kind of, this is a little bit of the distinction. Let me read a couple famous quotes from history. Have you ever heard of Machiavelli? You probably have. And you ever hear of someone called Machiavellian? Anyone know what that means? If you're called a kind of a Machiavellian leader, what does that mean? Anyone have a thought on that? Some mutant. If I call you a Machiavellian leader, would you kind of take that as a compliment?
I've never heard that word before.
Oh, no.
No.
Anyone else ever heard of Machiavellian? Well, let me go through a famous quote of his, Niccolo Machiavelli. One ought to be both
Is
feared
he
and
the,
loved. Yes, yes,
I was say, is he the
Dom.
guy that says like the end justifies the means?
Yeah, probably. Yep, probably that would be. Uh, um, um, one of his famous quotes is, "One ought to be both feared and loved, but as it is difficult for the two to go together, it is much safer to be feared than loved. For love is held by a chain of obligation which, men being selfish, is broken whenever it serves their purpose. But fear is maintained by a dread of punishment which never fails." And if you think about it, down through history, fear has probably been one of the biggest motivators ever. Fear of punishment has been in most of our in culture of work and history of work. Uh, we 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 almost preached fear as the way the best way to motivate. People are better motivated if they fear loss of something. So this has been kind of in our culture quite a bit. You think about it out there in many of our laws and how we deal with a number of societal issues. We promote a lot of fear, and this is a kind of a tradition that's been handed down. But there is, and back in history, there's another side of it, which is um, Lao Tzu in 500 BC. And then this is another form of dealing with people. When the master governs, the people are hardly aware that he exists. Next best is a leader who is loved. The next is one who is feared. The worst is one who is despised. If you don't trust the people, you make them untrustworthy. The master doesn't talk, he acts. When his work is done, the people say, amazing. We did it all by ourselves. So I would unpack that a little bit. Uh, and this kind of underlies this notion of empowerment. So the Oxford Dictionary requires defines empower as to enable, and what enabling means is creating. What you're trying to do is create the conditions for heightened motivation to get things done uh, through the development and helping people develop a strong sense of personal efficacy or competence. In other words, when you empower, you're actually creating an environment or a context that brings out the heightened internal motivation of people itself. Um, so that's kind of what we're talking about. For you as a manager, are creating an environment that leads to a sense of self-efficacy. And if you're feeling empowered, what you're feeling is a very heightened belief in your own self-efficacy or your ability to get things done, your ability to perform. You basically have a belief in yourself. So I guess an assumption underlying this is we all have a need for self-determination and a need to maybe control our environments somehow. And that's what that means. If you're really feeling uh, good about where you're working, the job you're doing, you have a heightened self-efficacy in a sense. And you're at your most productive when you're feeling this way. So that's what we're talking about and when we're talking about the whole empowerment. So the dimensions, if I say to you, if you're feeling empowered in your workplace, in other words, in control and the ability to get things done and feeling good about your ability and competence, usually here's what's going on. You have good sense of self-efficacy that you have the ability to get things done. You also have a feeling that you have some autonomy or self-determination, personal choice. People don't need to be standing over you with a stick in order for you to get your work done. You also feel that you have impact, personal control. You also probably feel that what you're doing is meaningful. And then you probably have a sense of security or trust. There's a good expression out there, and I'll put some notes, I'll put some PowerPoints in the module for you, concept called psychological safety. And I'm going to talk about that a little more when I talk about teams. Psychological safety means that you feel you can pretty much act and behave freely without fear of retribution. So those are the big dimensions of feeling empowered: sense of self-determination, control, meaning, and trust. So people feel empowered when they do things that are critical for the organization, when you feel like you can exercise some discretion and autonomy, when your accomplishments and what you do are visible and recognized, and when you feel well connected to other people of influence and support, you feel empowered yourself. And so, in order, if you want to, so strategies to build power for yourself, but also for others, get to know people. People who are well networked have feelings of empowerment, both inside and outside. Again, here's that whole develop your interpersonal relationship ability. Use your power in service to others rather than for your own self ends. Help other people enlarge their sphere of influence. The paradox is here, the more you help other people feel powerful, you actually gain more power. Another thing, and here's where communication comes in: keep people informed. You can never have too much communication. Make connections, and I mean, here's make heroes of other people. In other words, really recognize people for their accomplishments. Don't take all that glory for yourself. So these are just some strategies. These are talked about in various forms in the chapter. Some of my notes are from other books on empowerment and leadership. Uh, in an organization, there are certain things that may lead to a lowering of your self-efficacy, or maybe some things happening in your environment. Things like significant organizational change. Why people feel phenomenal anxiety around mergers, acquisitions, organizational change is you don't feel empowered. You don't have a sense of what's going on. Uh, Usually in startup ventures, people tend to feel unempowered. A lot of competitive pressures, real impersonal bureaucratic climates lead to that, or poor communications. Really highly centralized organizations maybe lead to this sense of a lowering of self-efficacy. I've seen a ton of people leave jobs or move from jobs because they just don't feel confident in themselves in the job anymore. So this lack of self-efficacy or confidence, we can work in environments that really lead these to this stuff to happen. So a big part of as a leader, are you creating an environment that leads to enhancing people's self-efficacy? Uh, these kind of supervisory styles tend to lead toward a non-empowering uh, uh, workforce, a high authoritarian, high control. You do as I say. A negative. Some managers, we call it management by exception. You only recognize other people when they make a mistake. And just think of it. If you go in your work life and you do your job 95% of the time, 5% you make a few mistakes. But the only time your boss comments on your work is when you make a mistake. That can get pretty old after a while. Um, Sometimes if there's a lack of reason for actions, arbitrary reward systems or low value to rewards, lack of competence-based rewards or lack of innovation. So sometimes a supervisory style leads to this kind of an environment. And sometimes how the job is designed, you may be in a job that is inherently non-empowering, a job that maybe you don't understand, or if you have a lack of training for it, if there's goals that are crazy, that maybe you don't have any variety in your work, uh, limited participation. You don't have much impact on decisions that affect you. Some other things, if you are expected to do a job and you don't have the resources, high, strict work routines, high rule structures. All of these kind of lead to that feeling of a lowered self-efficacy or a lowered feeling of empowerment. So, but let me just stop for a minute. Let me just ask you, what kind of environments do you work in? Anyone want to comment, or I don't know if you took the assessment for this or not, but one of the questions it asks you is how empowered do you feel in your work environments? Anyone want to comment on your work environment is either pro or con this way, based on what I'm saying? Yeah, Fran?
Yeah, so I think in my role, um, my job sort of entails that what they call in charge engagements that I work on,
Yeah,
which is really like you're responsible for everything. You have power, but at the same time, sometimes everything is your fault. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, I say that I want to have the freedom to make my own mistakes because that is the way I learn best. And when I'm in charging engagements, again, from top to bottom, I'm responsible for it. The client, even those above me, making sure they're doing their job, as well as those below me. So I'd say it's a pretty empowering thing. It's kind of like you know, I don't want to say heavy lies the crown, but when you are in charge of a lot, um, again, it's a lot of responsibility that comes along with that, and you're, bound to make mistakes. But I do feel empowered to make those on my own.
But you're relying to other people for the success too, aren't you? Is that,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
That's the dilemma of it. You have the crown, you're responsible, but maybe people who report to you uh have to carry out. And that's why I think it's a difficult role
yeah.
when you move up. Anyone, any comments on environments some of you are in? Are they would you call them empowering or not? Oh, don't be afraid to speak up. We know each other in here. Oh, what a quiet group. Yeah,
Yeah,
Dalton.
yeah. I'm kind of in the same boat. My environment's definitely not empowering, only because my manager and our work is like intertwined in a sense. So everything that I do kind of has her name attached. So I kind of do something. If she loves it, great. If not, back to the drawing board and retrying again.
And you say it's not empowering? What are the characteristics that you think make it not empowering?
Well, I wouldn't say it's like any like finite characteristics, but in terms of like, me being able to make a certain decision on something that I think would make sense to do, I
Yeah,
don't really have that type of like decision power, right? Where it's like for me, it's kind of like she'll explain to something and then I kind of have to do it that way, even if there's a better way to do it.
yeah,
It's more of like just like a lower level job tier, if that makes sense.
yeah, it does. We'll talk about that a little bit in delegation.
Mhm.
Anyone else have any comments on your work environments?
I
Don?
think yeah, I think my job's an interesting situation because I had a manager previously through the first half of this year and a bit of last year who was super empowering manager. Gave us a lot of opportunity to try new things, make mistakes, build new slides, come up with models based on, kind of general things that we're trying to accomplish, but it wasn't like, hey, do this, do that.
Yeah,
So there was a lot of room to experiment and come up with good ideas. A new manager came in towards this, in the second half of this year, and it's kind of switched up a little bit. She's not as good of a communicator as the previous manager was, I would say. Um, so there's not, I don't feel as empowered to try new things on my own because I'm not always fully confident in what we're trying to solve for. So I think it's actually an interesting situation.
all right. Well, as we talk about this, you can see maybe some of the stuff that's in here. That, or at least a structured way to maybe look at your situation where it might be coming off track. Um, anyone else? Anyone make a comment? All right, let me jump in. I'm going to talk a little bit about uh, I guess what I would call the heroic model of leadership. And uh, when Fran was talking about heavy wears the crown, um, here's what I think happens. You ever when I was a kid growing up, there was a TV show everyone loved called The Lone Ranger. Have any of you have you heard of the story of the Lone Ranger? Lone Ranger was a Texas Ranger who had a sidekick, Tonto, and he rode around the West doing good. And the main story line, usually in all the episodes, was there was a town of helpless townspeople, and the bad guys would be tormenting the townspeople. And the Lone Ranger would ride into town, solve all the problems, and usually it ended with the townspeople waving as the Lone Ranger rode out of town and said, "Hi ho, Silver." That's kind of the hero model. We love the hero model in our culture, and it's a model out there that we've applied to management. There's some unwritten assumptions that we have about people who are leaders that they should know they should know everything. They should know how to solve every problem. They should be more competent than me. These are all kind of unwritten assumptions that come with this hero model. And this heroic model has, maybe I'm pushing a little bit too much, but I think it's been a model of leadership that you have the hero there that solves problems, that can help everyone. The only problem with the hero model and the only problem with the Lone Ranger model is, what about the next time the townspeople are in trouble? Can they solve the problem? No, the hero has to come in and solve it. And what I quote there, the difficulty arises because this model of management, too commonly practiced and too commonly taught, increases the manager's feeling of responsibility while it sets up mechanisms that block the upward flow of communication and the commitment of subordinates. And what this means is, if you're in that person where you're wearing the crown, there's a heavy responsibility you feel. And you want to make sure everything gets done correctly. And it tends to lead to what's so unwittingly, even though you don't want to be unempowering, it almost sets you up to be that way, because you got to make sure everything's okay. You're going to be the one blamed. You're going to be the one at fault. You're the one who feels like you have to solve all the problems. And, to get over that, and you are the leader of, you may be the leader of a group and who is responsible. And the secret lies in, how do you create a shared responsibility group where people share and feel responsible, whereas you're not the only one who feels a sense of responsibility. And that's what people being empowered means. And a lot of people who move into managerial positions maybe unwittingly create unempowering environments, mainly because of the sense of responsibility they feel they have to have. So that, I just wanted to give that little speech, but if you want to develop a more empowering leadership style, you have to work with people on building a common vision of what your group, what your team is doing. And you're continuously working on the development of individuals and their skills and abilities. It's almost a continual responsibility, and till you reach the point of developing a team that shares responsibility. Everyone feels responsible in a work environment. Everyone feels empowered. Why, even though you may be the ultimate one that is responsible. So let me talk a little bit about delegation and engagement, and maybe in creating this kind of an environment or team. In terms of, and I'm using the word, your textbook doesn't use the word delegation, but that's what they're talking about when they talk about engagement of others. What kind of an organization are you in? Do you exist in a culture that allows you to delegate and engage others. And what's your attitude toward delegation? This is a biggie. And I'll talk a little bit about attitude on our part. And what about the person on the receiving end? So these are three areas of consideration. And one is the organization you're in. Does it favor you being this kind of a leader? Then with you, how comfortable are you delegating to others? And then what about the person on the receiving end? One of the inhibitors to you acting in an empowering way is maybe your attitudes about subordinates or people who work for you, maybe your personal insecurities you might have. What about your possible needs for control? Boy, if you are a high achieving person and you have achieved things well on your own, a lot of it's because you're controlling everything. You suddenly become a manager of a group of people where to achieve means everyone has to be achieving. And a lot of that is giving up a sense of control you might have because you're not the one doing it. So all of these sometimes are inhibitors, like your attitude. Why should I waste time trying to delegate to others? I can do it better on my own. Or it just takes too much time to delegate to somebody else. And I'm the one ultimately responsible for what happens anyway. So I'm better off not taking that. So you have to really focus on what your belief system is. One of the advantages of delegation or engagement, it increases your time. You help develop people that work for you, their capabilities. That demonstrates confidence in them. It builds commitment. There's tons of research that, by the way, out here that supports all this. It improves your decision making. The more competence you have with the people you're working with, the better the decision making. It increases that sense of efficacy. So it fosters collaboration rather than competition. Some of the outcomes of really effectively delegating, people accept assignments, there's high morale, a lot better coordination. You're increasing the problem-solving abilities of everyone. Again, more discretionary time. You build your interpersonal relationships, and you tend to get the task done better. Again, just summarizing what I had talked about with empowering. When you delegate effectively, you're really empowering others. And what you need to do, you got to have a clear vision. What you're helping is other people develop their personal mastery, their competencies. You model for them how it should happen. You provide social support. What happens is you tend to have a lot of a positive emotional environment. You have to provide good information. Communication's important. Dalton, you were talking about the lack of communication. Communication's pretty critical. People have got to have the resources. If you're delegating to someone, do they have the resources to do what you want? And et cetera. So when we talk about delegating, we're talking about the assignment of a task. So it's work focused. Empowerment, in a sense, focuses on the individual, is what I talked about. But through focusing on a task or assigning a task, you can use that as a way to empower. And it's not simply turning over work to somebody that you don't like to do, and it does increase productivity and the organization's ability to achieve goals, etc. So, when you delegate, if you're thinking about delegating to someone, you got to think about the qualifications they have. Do they have the ability to do what you want them to do? Do they have a sense of commitment? You're going to expand their capabilities. Is there evidence in them that they share the values you have? That's that whole notion of a shared responsibility team. And delegation is a bit time consuming. Ultimately, it saves you time, but it does take time. And just some guidelines. What's your goal that you want to achieve? Try and delegate completely to people. People should participate in it. Try and let people know the authority you're giving, turning responsibility. What level of authority comes? What's their decision-making level? What's the organizational boundaries you're putting on people? You want to make sure they have the support. How are you measuring them? How are you holding them accountable? Be consistent about it. And don't let them delegate back to you. And, be clear on consequences, etc. So a lot of it's a communication process back and forth. And too often we don't take the time to effectively do this. When you're delegating to someone, what's the extent of authority you're giving to them? So some of the issues when you get into delegate or engaging, you're trying to decide when what I talked about. Are subordinates capable? Do they have the needed information? Are there common values with what you're trying to do? That all has to do with creating a vision of where you're going, and then deciding who you're going to involve, deciding how you're going to delegate, and then the effective outcomes. So it's a nice little chart that's in the book, but they're talking about in the book the delegation, and I know I'm just hitting here on some things tonight that a lot of principles, but I think what's provided in my slides, but also in the text as you read it, a good structured way for you to look at sharing work. And I'll talk a little bit about it next week when we talk about teamwork, but you're trying to if people that work for you, what you're trying to get them to do is share in the responsibility for what your whole team or group has to do. You're trying to build a shared responsibility team. And there's envisioning that takes place. There's a necessity for everyone's capabilities to be developed. And so you're working on individual development, and then you're giving them the opportunity to network in order to get the work done. So I know I quickly went through that tonight, just a lot of points on empowerment, but this links quite a bit to the discussion of power and empowerment. One is, how do you use your power in a way that makes other people feel powerful? These are what I talked about tonight, are what happens inside all of us that makes us feel powerful. This is also going to be linked to a discussion later on motivation. How do you effectively motivate? This is one of the most effective ways to motivate, is creating an environment where people feel powerful. If people feel powerful, they're intrinsically motivated. So those are just some of my thoughts on this. I don't know if anyone has anything they want to share or talk about. I think you can if you're running a team, you can take some of these principles and try and create, even in your small team, a shared responsibility group, even if the wider culture of your organization isn't always as empowering as you would like. So, anyone have any questions or thoughts on this? Yeah,
Uh,
Brand.
yeah, I just generally, am curious about, I guess, more specific situations in which you're trying to delegate, and, empower people below you to step up to,
Yeah,
take on tasks that they haven't done before. I guess, can you speak at all to finding that balance between taking the time to sit with them, teach them, instruct them, but then also, again, challenge them with doing it on their own while you sort of cover your own responsibilities, your own tasks that are on your plate, in addition to helping them. Um, how do you sort of, I guess, achieve that balance, or are there skills or resources, you know?
I think even just take some of those points of effective delegation that I had on the one slide there, and maybe explicit. I don't know. A part of it is um, people. Part of it really is a two-way communication going on, and them understanding what you're trying to do. That's why you kind of, okay, here's a new task I know you haven't done. Uh, and you may be show, but there's going to be an ongoing give and take with them having the freedom to feel they can come back to you. Also, the freedom maybe to make mistakes at times. But I think it's going to be a little more give and take. But it really is clarity around what you're expecting them to do, maybe time frames, all of that, of those expectations, what you're looking for. Then a chance for them to question or say, here's what I don't understand. Uh, I don't know how you can get around that. It takes a little time. And they get to a sense of working with you of when they can come to you. What you don't want is to keep that having them make the same mistakes and not getting it. I was just talking to someone today about working with someone who doesn't seem to get it, even when they spend the time and go through what you're talking about. Maybe the fit isn't there.
Yeah.
That could be too. I always say too, with people you're working with, your first decision is, if someone doesn't have the skill level you would want them at, is it an attitude problem or is it a skill development problem? And by attitude I mean is they're negative about things for 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 other reasons. People are lazy on putting time in, absenteeism, all that. Is there an attitude issue going on there, or is it a real skill development? I don't know if that helps, but
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
anyone else have any thoughts on this? Um, I should get you some notes on the textbook used to cover it. It was called a personnel management interview, and a way to set up ongoing meetings with people. And I'll see if I can find notes that might be helpful. It used to be in one of the chapters, but it's an ongoing uh, weekly, bi-weekly meeting with people that work for you. Each of them come in with agendas, each side. You have an agenda of things you're working with them. And it's really a sharing of ideas and a problem solving. And I'll try and find some notes on it and get it out to everyone. I would say the book does a really excellent job outlining points of delegation and different ways of starting to move on it. So I really like the structure that's laid out there. All right. Again, I'll be looking forward for your papers coming in. Next week, we're going to spend some time on teams and groups and pushing more some of this in class. So we'll see you next week at 20th and Olney. All right. Anyone have any other questions before I break?